All right. The judge there, Emery, as you just heard, essentially decided to take a 10-minute recess. We're not sure exactly what's going on. It has to do, we believe, with the rebuttal witness, who is a pulmonology expert who has been brought back to rebut some of the testimony that we heard earlier this week from the defense witnesses. Also, as you noted, in an interesting development, one that we were sort of expecting given the experts that we've spoken to here on CBSN, Ricky Kleeman, Keir Dougall, Jessica Levinson, that Derek Chauvin will not testify on his own behalf. He will not take to the witness stand in defense of himself, and that is expected, and we sort of expected that. And so that was sort of the big news earlier this morning. So we're not exactly sure what the reason for the recess is, but a couple of interesting developments, as we were saying. Dr. Tobin there, I believe his name is Dr. Tobin, was sort of rebutting what we had heard earlier from a number of defense experts, including a doctor who is trained in forensic medicine, who brought up the evidence he claimed of carbon monoxide in George Floyd's blood.
Right.
And you were sort of hearing the rebuttal there.
Right, and we should point out that even on cross-examination, that particular expert had to admit that he didn't even know, if the car was on, the cruiser was on or not. So he sort of took a bit of a beating in cross-examination, but now we have this rebuttal witness. But we do have Keir Dougall, who's back with us. So, Keir, we actually are not sure exactly what's going on. So we're hoping you can sort of shed some light on, why the break, what's happening with this particular witness, what's happening in the courtroom.
Yeah, so it looks like we're getting ready for rebuttal cross-examination of Dr. Tobin. As we discussed earlier, the prosecutor brought him back to talk about this new issue of the carbon monoxide, and that's an area that is proper for prosecution rebuttal. It was subtle, what we just saw a moment ago, but the prosecution scored some points here. First of all, when Dr. Tobin testified that there's a lot of scientific literature on the point that Dr. Fowler apparently said he couldn't find anything on previously, I would expect to hear that later in closing arguments. That Dr. Fowler, the defense expert, hadn't studied up, and so it's undercutting him, as well as this very specific point about the blood oxygen percentages. Points like that are going to come back and become part of the prosecution's argument, I expect, later, as to reasons why you should trust Dr. Tobin and the other prosecution experts, and you should not, if you're the jury, you should not trust the defense experts.
So let's play that second soundbite there, Keir, with Mr. Nelson, the defense attorney, and let me get your take on it.
What Dr. Fowler testified to yesterday was how you can't rely on the oxygen levels because it's the carbon monoxide binds to the oxygen and it can give a false reading. You need this hypoxy testing, the hypoxy oxygen testing. So the bottom line is that this is information that has been within the state's control. The state has had ample notice that this could have played a part of Dr. Fowler's testimony. It is incredibly prejudicial to the defense at this point, now after Dr. Fowler has testified and left the state, to bring forth evidence. Again, the jury being the trier of the fact, Dr. Fowler was pretty clear. He was not saying that this was the cause of death. He's simply opining that it wasn't considered by the state. And apparently it was considered to be a ridiculous concept by the state of Minnesota that they didn't think to test it.
So, Keir, here it sounds to me like the defense attorney, Mr. Nelson, is pleading his case to the judge. The prosecution wanted to bring back Dr. Tobin to rebut the testimony of Dr. Fowler, who was a defense witness, and Mr. Nelson was saying, hey, the state had all this information, and to now bring Dr. Tobin back in front of the jury is prejudicial to the defense. What do you make of that argument?
Well, it looks like the trial judge has rejected that argument. That's an argument that Mr. Chauvin can take up on appeal if he believes that the ruling allowing Dr. Tobin's rebuttal testimony was wrong. But that's why, that's what the judge's job is to call balls and strikes like this during the trial.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, did he not expect? I was just going to say, Emery, did he not expect that would? I guess if his point is that the prosecution was aware, was he trying to say that the prosecution was aware about this detail of carbon monoxide? Or was he saying, look, we introduced it, now the jury understands it, and now they want to come back and rebut it? That's not fair. I'm just trying to understand, what he's trying to say here. And I mean, I get that the judge has ruled and we're moving on from that, but I'm just trying to figure out, what his point was.
Yeah, so I think it's, if you're the defense lawyer, you want to make all of the above. You want to make every argument you can to preserve the issues on appeal for your client. So that's I think what's going on in the courtroom right there.
That's interesting, because it sort of means that you're not you probably, I mean, the judge can rule in the other way, I guess, but just in case he doesn't rule your way, you're on the record now, so that if and when an appeal happens, you can point to this moment and say this wasn't a fair trial.
Right. You can say that I made this argument and it should have, the decision should have gone the other way.
Oh, that's really interesting. Let's play a little bit of Dr. Martin Tobin's sound, the reason why he was brought on to testify. I believe it's SOT 3.
Carboxyhemoglobin is when the carbon monoxide combines with the protein in a blood that's called the hemoglobin. And so it's the combination of the carbon monoxide and that protein in the blood.
And why is carboxyhemoglobin, again, important?
It's important because when the carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin, it displaces the oxygen off the hemoglobin. So you need the oxygen on the hemoglobin. You don't want the carboxy, and it takes it over.
Then do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether this statement that Mr. Floyd's carboxyhemoglobin could have increased by 10 to 18% is reliable?
No, I believe it is not reliable.
Okay, so Keir, you were saying that it looks like there's a possibility that the defense may want to cross-examine this witness. I guess it's speculation. Sort of, what would they be attempting to do if they do cross-examine him?
Well, there's certainly on rebuttal, when the prosecutor brings a witness back on for what's called redirect, their lawyerese is, and you get to have recross after. So I would fully expect there to be further cross-examination of Dr. Tobin to perhaps get at some of the points that we saw in the earlier argument that Mr. Chauvin's lawyer was making. Just try to make those points to the jury through the witness on cross-examination. We're obviously pretty far into the science when you're hearing testimony like that piece of sound you just heard. But the overall big picture is, what caused Mr. Floyd's death? Is it a homicide, or is it undetermined, as Dr. Fowler, Mr. Chauvin's expert, testified? That's where this tussle is going to continue all the way through closing arguments, because it's a key point for both sides. And Mr. Chauvin's burden here is much lighter than the prosecution's. He's only got to convince one juror that there's a reasonable doubt on the one side, and on the other side, as we've said repeatedly, the prosecutors have to unanimously prove beyond a reasonable doubt that their experts are right.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the notion of the carbon monoxide is so interesting because I've just never heard of that. I mean, I've just never heard that you know, you could be, you know, on the ground in the open, in an open space, you know, for let's use the timing that Mr. Chauvin had his knee on on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes 29 seconds, and that you would argue, well, you know, could it also be the carbon monoxide that he was breathing from the exhaust of the vehicle where he was laying?
Yeah, and you know, I in the reporting that I've seen, you know, it hasn't been yet established whether or not the car was even on.
Yeah, I think Emery was saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you know, this is maybe a little bit of a detour in terms of the theory of the case. You know, I guess my question would be, well, you know, why would you force somebody to breathe the smoke from a tailpipe if it was there? That would be another issue I would expect the police officers to be, you know, to be sensitive to. But again, you know, as I understand Mr. Chauvin's theory, it's well, it could have been the drug use, it could have been the heart condition, it could have been this or that or the other thing, and Dr. Fowler said I would not have reached a conclusion about whether about what the cause of death would. I would have found that it was indeterminate or undetermined, and that's a key. If the jurors agree with that, if they accept that, or if they even have one of them has a reasonable doubt about that, that will result in either a hung jury or an acquittal for Mr. Chauvin. So this is a key. This area of the trial, this subject of the trial, is absolutely key for both sides. I expect them to fight hard over these points.
So, Keir, moving ahead past whoever ends up testifying, and we're looking to sort of the closing arguments, can you give us a sense of the purpose of the closing arguments? That might seem like a simple question, but and how does it compare to the opening arguments? What are they really going to be trying to do with the arguments?
Right. So in the start of the beginning, in the opening, it's about what do you expect. Jurors, what can you expect to see? And the prosecutors are going to outline their theory of the case, and the defense is going to highlight what they expect the defenses to be. Then there's this long period of detailed testimony with witnesses and exhibits and all this evidence. And you know, so you do this deep exploration, deep dives in all these different specific areas. What argument does on the backside is it allows the prosecutor to meticulously, in a summary way, highlight the key pieces of evidence and tie all the witness testimony together. How, as a prosecutor, you will want to show how each of your witnesses supports, corroborates, bolsters the other. How their testimony is consistent with the exhibits. How your theory all hangs together. And paint the big picture for the jury now, step back out at 100,000 feet and get out of the weeds and look at the overall prosecution theory and how each one of these jurors should be confident on the prosecution's argument that the case has been proved beyond a reasonable doubt, and you will ask the jury to convict Mr. Chauvin. The reply argument or the defense summary argument at that point is going to focus on the specific areas where they think the prosecution's case is weak, particular areas where there are conflicts in the expert testimony. I would expect an argument along the lines of, how can you find that the case is proved beyond a reasonable doubt when you've got experts who are disagreeing with what the cause is, what reasonable force is, whether proper police practices were applied. How, as a juror, how could you vote and find beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Chauvin is guilty. That'll be what I expect to be the defense summary argument. And the prosecutors will get the last word. They get the last word because they have the burden, and it's a high burden. And they will then answer their theory as to why the defense points are incorrect and why the jury should vote to convict. After that, the judge will read a set of instructions about the law, what the law is and what the charges are to the jury. And then it's in the jury's hands, and we will wait as long as it takes. The jury may ask to see exhibits while they're deliberating. They may ask for testimony to be read back to them. They may have questions, but that's the process, and we'll see what the result is.
All right, Keir, thank you so much.